Good to have you with us. Los Angeles is on edge this Monday after violent clashes between demonstrators and security forces at the weekend, with the Californian governor vowing to sue the US president for deploying National Guard soldiers to the city. The state's attorney general is to seek a court order declaring that the use of the Guard was unlawful and asking for a restraining order to halt the deployment. Accused of inflaming the situation for political gain, Donald Trump is today doubling down on the rhetoric, blaming insurrectionists for the unrest. Further protests are planned in more than a dozen cities nationwide. Let's hear from some of those gathered today in LA.
I think it's an intimidation tactic. I think these protests have been peaceful. There's no one trying to do anything sort of damage right now, and yet you have the National Guard with loaded magazines and large guns standing around trying to intimidate Americans from exercising our First Amendment rights and saying, hey, what we think you're doing is wrong, and we're going to let you know.
I think Trump deploying National Guard is ridiculous. I think he's escalating. He's trying to make a show for his agenda. And LA is the community. All we're asking is that people aren't ripped from their jobs, from middle school graduations in front of their children, being separated from their families in a very just traumatic, distressing way. And they're being held without food and water for 12 to 24 hours. And we're just here to say that that's not okay. This is our community.
Well, for more on the situation in LA and the consequences, we're joined by Alex Nowrasteh, immigration policy analyst at the Cato Institute. Alex, thanks so much for being with us on the programme. Firstly, is it actually legal for these troops to be deployed? Donald Trump saying this evening that 700 Marines are also going to be sent to LA. The California Attorney General saying this is all unlawful. So can Trump actually do this?
Probably. So the American laws are pretty complicated on this issue, but there is a lot of historical precedent, and there are statutes that allow the president to nationalize the National Guard in individual states and deploy troops. Now, whether this particular situation counts as one where the president can do that is up for debate. But what is clear is that the courts are going to very carefully scrutinize what Trump has done here. And if there is any way that this is unlawful, they will likely smack it down.
Yeah, and Trump is saying, more troops are going to be deployed if needed. As I say, he's planning on sending in the Marines as well. What is this all about? He's also claiming that, LA would have been completely obliterated, in his words, if the National Guard hadn't been called in.
Well, listen, we all saw some of these riots begin on late Friday night. They began likely in response to some very aggressive law enforcement actions that day where Immigration and Customs Enforcement did not coordinate with the local police and doing some worksite raids to apprehend illegal immigrants. Some of those raids got out of hand, and it's unclear who fired the first shots or who committed the violence first, but there certainly was a good amount of violence on Friday night. On Saturday, when President Trump did order the deployment of 2,000 National Guard troops and the Marines to be on standby. Yesterday, we did see a large number of automobiles that were burned in the city, a lot of graffiti that was sprayed, and a lot of other violence that was going on, blocking of the freeways, etc. Now, that's not to say that ICE didn't overreact. I think the evidence is that ICE did overreact in many cases, but violence like this is clearly unacceptable. But the president is also exaggerating. I don't think that Los Angeles was going to be on the verge of burning down. I grew up in Los Angeles. I remember the 1992 riots and when those got out of hand. This does not feel like that situation at all. But a lot of protesters clearly did go and cross the line, and they should be punished severely for destruction of private property.
Do you think, though, that this is part of Donald Trump seeking a showdown with a political rival? He does have a very particular relationship with the governor of California.
It's absolutely political from President Trump's perspective, that doesn't mean he doesn't have a good point. I mean, violence is unacceptable on American streets like this. And if state and local officials don't want to clamp down on violence, there is some responsibility of the president to come in and other agencies to come in and try to reduce civil disorder and the destruction of private property. However, everything that President Trump does is calculated politically. He is in conflict politically with President Newsom, who is going to seek the Democratic nomination for president in 2028. So it's sort of a perfect political storm where the president gets to distract from a lot of his other political, economic, and governance challenges by focusing on some actual violence, some legitimate and dangerous and destructive violence in Los Angeles that needs to be stopped, regardless of who comes in and stops it.
And it might be hard to answer this question because Trump is quite unpredictable, but what do you think is going to happen next, Alex? Would he go as far as invoking the Insurrection Act?
So I did see a good debate today between a few constitutional attorneys that asked that very question. You really said it. Trump is unpredictable on this, but a lot of these constitutional attorneys like Jack Goldsmith, who is a very well-respected constitutional law expert, says that he likely could already invoke the Insurrection Act to put more troops on Los Angeles streets if the violence doesn't shut down. Now, I don't think any rational person viewing what's going on right now could view this as an insurrection or an open rebellion or anything like that. It is at most some civil disobedience and some rioting that should be gotten under control. However, the statute for the Insurrection Act is very broad. It allows the president an enormous amount of power. It needs to be fixed to reduce presidential power to deploy troops domestically inside the United States. But there is unfortunately very good legal support for the president doing that should he decide to declare the Insurrection Act to be in effect.
Alex, we'll have to leave it there for now. Thanks so much for being with us, though. That is Alex Nowrasteh, Immigration Policy Analyst at the Cato Institute. Turning